Okay. Let's see if it is switched. Test. 1, 2. Testing. I don't know why people have to screw with the settings. It's not like there's, that was 1 seconds. Let's go with the live. For some reason, I'm having a hard time pulling up my channel. Okay, let's see. All right, we got it. Finally. All right, so last time we were talking about marketing theory, and we were talking about whether or not marketing is an art or a science, and we sort of agreed that it's both. It's an art and a science, right? The study of human behavior and buying consumption patterns can be viewed from a scientific perspective, and we can study the consumer in a scientific way. And it's also an art in that developing these appeals is inherently somewhat subjective, right? Coming up with great ads that will engage the mind of the consumer and deliver a selling message is somewhat subjective. And even some of the award-winning ads fail to deliver on the part of selling a persuasive message, right? So if we accept that marketing is a science and an academic discipline, what's the first step to establishing that? Well, it's the definition of marketing. What makes marketing different from psychology, right? Psychology is the study of the human mind. And obviously, that is an enormously important aspect of the scientific aspect of marketing. What is it that motivates people to buy certain things? Why is it that we want certain products or services? I think we did this poll last time where I said, how many of you have an iPhone? And like the vast majority of you had the iPhone. Why is it that we have all been convinced that we want the iPhone as opposed to an Android or something else? Well, that's largely psychologically driven, right? Why is it we inaugurated on Monday a new president of the United States? Why is it that people voted for Donald J. Trump over Kamala Harris, who was the representative of the incumbent party? That's largely a result of psychology. What did most people feel about the economy? Well, most people felt that the economy was not working for them, in spite of overwhelming objective facts that suggest that it is. For the first time in many, many years, the wages of average Americans were increasing faster than they had been in previous decades. But people felt like inflation was a bigger hindrance to their economic well-being than was the increase in their wages. Now, inflation is not necessarily a bad thing. So, for example, if you have a fixed rate mortgage, if you had gotten a mortgage 5 years ago or 7 years ago, and you had a low interest rate, inflation helps you, right? If your wages are increasing and your mortgage stays the same, what you've got more buying power, right? And you're spending less of your discretionary income on that mortgage. But that's not what people felt, right? They were concerned about inflation. So what is the domain of marketing? The first thing that we have to do is we have to distinguish marketing from psychology or economics as a discipline. So what is it that makes marketing marketing? Well, we have to start with the definitions. So the National Association of Marketing Teachers, which is the forerunner of the American Marketing Association in 1935, proposed this definition, and I think it's really, really fatally flawed. Marketing is the performance of business activities that direct the flow of goods and services from producer to consumer. Now, it touches on a number of things that are important, right? It talks about goods and services from producer to consumer. That's important. That's a big portion of marketing, is focusing on how we get goods from the producer to the consumer. And the earliest marketing studies, and one of the reasons that this definition persisted, was because the earliest marketing studies focused on how do you get goods from consumers or from producers to consumers. So there were literally, it started as a subfield of agricultural economics, looking at how we get things like cheese in Wisconsin from the producer to the consumer in the most efficient manner. Literally, you had, agricultural economists getting on trains and seeing how it was that you could get a perishable good from the producer to the consumer in the most efficient manner. And so the earliest studies in marketing largely were logistics studies. These are the parts of marketing that nobody today thinks of as being marketing. The movement of goods from place to place to get it there in the most efficient manner so that you have this utility of time and place. You get the goods when you want them, where you want them, at a place that's convenient to you, right? Why is it that Walmart overtook much of the small town, downtown stores? Well, they provided more goods cheaper in a convenient place. Why is Amazon now overtaking Walmart in the delivery and sale of goods to consumers? Well, because rather than having to go to the store, rather than having to go to Walmart, and going to Walmart is, for many of us, a horrific experience, isn't it? I mean, it's a miserable experience. I have found evidence that the Yeti exist, and they're at the Guthrie Walmart in front of me. Right? I mean, it's just like the hordes and masses. And if I can get it delivered to my door in record-breaking time, wouldn't I rather do that than go stand in line at Walmart? Probably, right? So these were enormously important studies, but marketing is more than just about moving goods from producers to consumers. It's also about other things, services, ideas, right? Why is it that Donald John Trump won re-election? Well, he convinced more of the voters in this country that he had a plan for fixing their problems. That's an intangible. How are you going to do that? How are you going to influence the world's economy? One of the things that he's talked about in terms of influencing the world's economy is developing a crypto reserve currency. If I asked you what backs up the United States dollar, what would you tell me? Gold. Yeah, we haven't been on the gold standard since 1973. In 1973, Richard Nixon floated the dollar, which means that it's backed up by what? It's fiat currency. It's worth whatever anybody's willing to pay for it. It's backed up by the full faith and credit of the United States government. It's the world's reserve currency. It's not backed up by gold. There's nothing backing it up. It's fiat. It's worth, and you can see this, you can go online and you can look at what the dollar is worth compared to other currencies, right? It floats. Why is it worth something? Because we have the largest economy in the world. And people believe that it's worth something. Even if you said that it was backed up by gold, which it was until 1973, the price of gold is in itself completely arbitrary, right? Is it useful for anything? Really? I mean, I love it. I have lots of jewelry. Right? I mean, I have a gold bracelet, 2 gold diamond rings, a Rolex, which is partly gold. But is it useful? Not really. It's decorative. Its price is completely arbitrary. It's dependent upon what we are willing to pay for it. And so we have, like a world economy now that largely is dependent upon the movement of goods and services in an efficient manner. And what the dollar is worth is completely dependent upon that economy, our economy being the strongest. Will we always be the strongest economy? Will we always be the world's reserve currency? I don't know. Maybe not. There are emerging economies that have the potential to be far larger than the United States. Who would that be? China has the potential, right? Most of our goods that we buy are now produced somewhere else. They're not produced in the United States. So the definition was adopted, this definition of marketing was adopted by the AMA in 1948 and again in 1960. And the definition stood for 50 years. And in the mid-1980s, the American Marketing Association began revisions on the definition. In 1985, they came up with this version of the definition of the domain of marketing. Marketing is the process of planning and executing the conception, pricing, promotion, and distribution of ideas. So here we now see that we're focusing not just on tangible goods that we can move, but the distribution of ideas, goods, and services to create exchange that satisfies individual and organizational objectives. So we're now recognizing that marketing is not just done by firms, it's not just done by companies, it's done by everybody. It's done by you, right? The current version that the American Marketing Association has changed to is marketing is the activity for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that benefits its customers, the organization, stakeholders, and society at large. I think this is a pretty good definition, except that I would add to this definition that marketing is a pervasive activity. It is a pervasive human activity. We do it constantly. You are constantly marketing yourself to your friends, to your family, right? Think about when you were a kid. You wanted to do certain things. You wanted to go with your friends to certain places, and you had to sell your parents on the idea of letting you do that. I want to go with Garrett to the skating rink on, Thursday. And your parents would say, that's a school night. You can't go to the skating rink on Thursday because you have to get up and go to school on Friday. Well, what if I promise that I'll be home before, 7 o'clock? And you start to negotiate, right? So it's a pervasive activity that we do. You want people to like you. As I said in the last lecture, Aristotle says man is by nature a social creature. Why are we a social creature? There are lots of creatures that are not necessarily social. Why are we social? Are we the fastest animal on Earth? No. That distinction goes to the cheetah. Are we the strongest? Well, it depends on how you define strongest, right? Like pound for pound, in terms of body mass to ability to carry, I think ants, for example, can carry far more weight than we can. Elephants are far stronger in terms of total brute force than we are, right? I mean, it depends on how you define these things, but we're not the strongest. We're a fragile species. How is it that we have survived in a hostile environment? Well, it's largely as a result of the fact that we're social and we specialize and we have developed ways of overcoming this fragile state that we're in. You're in a building today that was built by engineering and construction that allows us, I mean, it's a horrible day out there, in my opinion. I hate the cold. I yearn to live in Florida. And I can retire at 55 from UCO and I'm moving to Florida or someplace that is far warmer, although it's currently snowing in New Orleans, which is one of the cities that I would love to live in. But that's an unusual occurrence, right? Most of the time it's far warmer than it is here. And yet we're pretty comfortable inside this building, although I tell students this in the spring semester particularly, you need to dress in layers because as it gets warmer, and they don't turn on the air conditioning, it may be cold in the morning and you'll have to start shedding stuff by mid-afternoon if you're in this building, because they flip the switch once a year or twice a year to go from heat to cold, from heating to air conditioning. And so, but we're in a building that provides shelter, and all of that is as a result of the fact that we have developed as a species ways of accommodating ourselves to harsh climates. Like today, we're in the summer when it's 110 degrees and we can sit in this room and not die of heat stroke. That's largely a result of marketing, right? So marketing is a pervasive social activity, is what I would add to the definition. So I would add marketing is a pervasive social activity. These are PowerPoints are available on the website. What is needed for marketing to occur? What do we have to have? Once we've decided that this is the domain of marketing, that's a pervasive social activity that involves some kind of exchange. It may be the exchange of good feelings between friends. It may be money. It may be barter, right? What do we have to have? Well, we have to have more than one party. When I say it's a pervasive social activity, I guess you could escape marketing by moving to a deserted island and living in isolation. There are examples of this throughout history of people who have been stranded in various locations and had to live on their own, or people who move off the grid. It's harder and harder to do. One of my friends on Facebook published something like, I would never let them put a chip in me because that's the sign of the beast and it allows the government to track you. They're tracking you now, right? Like, don't want to be tracked? This device, I mean, if you have a modern car, my car has OnStar in it. They can follow you. If you use a credit card, you're being tracked. You're photographed hundreds and hundreds of times every day without even knowing it. Every time you walk into a Walmart, every time you walk past a ATM, you're being tracked. One of the most damning, this was years and years and years ago. I remember there are certain events in our history that impress upon you where you were at the time you heard about them. And I remember where I was when the Oklahoma City bombing occurred. I wasn't an attorney yet. I was working for an attorney. And we were going to go file a bankruptcy case that morning. And I was in my bathroom in Guthrie getting ready when the bomb went off. And I can remember the water in the sink shaking. That's how far the reverberation from the explosion traveled. And I went out as I was getting dressed, turned on the news, and there was the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. The place we were going to go across the street to the bankruptcy court, which is actually in the old post office. So there was the federal courthouse, there was the Murrah building, the federal courthouse, and then the old post office, which is where the bankruptcy court is. And obviously everything in downtown Oklahoma City was shut down. I remember that. One of the most damning pieces of evidence against Timothy McVeigh was a camera in a lobby across the street from the Murrah building that clearly shows him getting out of the Ryder truck and walking away. That was years and years and years ago. Think about how much further we've come in terms of the surveillance to which you are subjected. People are walking around constantly, filming themselves. I have a pair of Meta Ray-Bans, right? I mean, it allows you to take video and capture stuff from your glasses. You all are constantly uploading your videos, your photos to Facebook, Instagram, all kinds of social media platforms, right? So you're photographed literally multiple times a day without even thinking about it. So you could move to a deserted island, or I don't know, up to Alaska and off the grid somewhere, and you wouldn't engage in marketing if you're going out and shooting your food and planting a garden and things like that. But for the most part, we all live in a society, so it requires more than one party. It's not marketing if you're just doing it by yourself. It is fundamental to that you have a desire and the ability to have your needs and wants satisfied. You have to have communication. We have to have some way of communicating about what it is that we want and need, and the other party has to understand that. And then you have to have something to exchange. Now, again, this doesn't have to be something tangible, like these ducks. It can be just the feelings of friendship that you get from the exchange. I do lots of things with my friends that I don't want to do because I'm going to want them to do stuff with me. I'm from Santa Fe, New Mexico. There's a ski basin in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I hate the cold. One of my friends loves to ski. So we went to my parents' house and we went skiing, and I went, and I'm okay at it. I was on the ski team when I was in school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but I hate it. I hate every minute of it. But I did it because I know that I'm going to want him to do stuff with me that maybe he doesn't want to do, like go to the lake. I love going to the lake and being on a boat. It's like, like great. So you exchange these, I mean, it's friendship. It's not just about goods or services, but exchanging something, and it can be something that is not necessarily tangential or tangible. Any questions about marketing theory? All right. Well, let's talk about strategies for a minute. And I'm probably going to have to let you go a little early. I've got a frozen pipe, and I've got a plumber that's coming. So when he calls, if I have to leave, I apologize. But as I said, I hate the weather, and as a result of the weather, I've got these frozen pipes and a plumber that's going to come and hopefully fix the problem. So goals. What is a good goal or objective? Part of marketing involves identifying your goals. So let's talk about you. One of the things that I try to do in this class is I try to make this relevant to you. It's not just a lot of the examples in the textbooks are about large companies. They're about things like Facebook. They're about Walmart. They're about Amazon. But for the most part, many of you are not going to go to work for Amazon or Facebook. You're going to go to work for small to mid-sized companies, and you're going to engage in marketing throughout the course of your life. So what is it that is relevant to you? What are your goals? What is a good goal? Somebody give me a goal. What's a goal that you have? Okay, you think that's a good goal? Graduate college. All right. That may be a good goal. How do you make it a better goal?
Saying I want above the 3-point.
Okay, so you want to graduate and you want above a 3.0. All right, is that a good goal? I think you could make it better. There are degree programs. For example, I had a student in my class several semesters ago. I don't know why he was taking my class, because he obviously didn't need it. Most of the people who take my classes are marketing majors, right? I haven't taught principles of marketing for quite a while, actually. This is my first time to teach it in a number of years. Historically, I've taught marketing ethics, which is a 4,000 level course, and integrated marketing communication, which is a 4,000 level course, and some of the advanced sales classes. But even this class, by and large, on the whole, people who take this class are not necessarily marketing majors, but they are business majors. It's required. You have to have marketing in every business major. So if you're a management major, you have to have a marketing class. You have to take principles of marketing. If you're a finance major, you have to take principles of marketing. Just like marketing majors have to take principles of finance, they have to take accounting. I don't know what they call it anymore. 1 and 2, I think, isn't that part of your degree program that you have to have accounting 1 and 2? I feel so sorry for you. I'm like, Those are four. I don't know how anybody stays awake long enough to get a degree in accounting. But, you know, I suppose how many accounting majors do I have in here? I'm so sorry. You'll get to cost and then you'll come back and see me. All right. So you have to have these programs, but most of you, by and large, on the whole, are business majors. And the reason you have to take this class, even though you're not a marketing major, is you have to understand how all of these functions of business work together. Because when you go out and you get a job in business, even if you're an accounting major, you're going to have to provide data and information to the marketers that they're going to use in order to price their goods and services, right? Are we losing money on this product? Is there a reason that we're losing money? Is it a loss leader, for example? When I was in industry, one of the things that the accountants constantly wanted us to do, I worked for a company called the American Education Corporation. We were an educational software publisher. We produced learning management systems for K-12, right? Just like D2L is a learning management system for higher education, we produced it for K-12. But one of the things that made it different in the K-12 market than higher education is that everything that's in the LMS that you all use, D2L, I have put there. We don't let primary and secondary teachers have that kind of control. So everything that's in D2L, all of the PowerPoints, all of the videos, things like that, are all things that I have chosen to put there. In the K-12 market, we don't let teachers do that. They have to have prescribed lesson plans, right? And the curriculum has to meet state standards. In particular, it has to meet the standards of California and Texas, the curriculum committees of those two states, if you wanted to get anywhere. Why? Those are the two largest states in terms of student body population, right? Which makes it interesting because politically, they are diametrically different from each other. California overwhelmingly did not vote for Donald John Trump. Texas overwhelmingly voted for Donald John Trump. And I can give you an example of how this works. I had a friend who wrote a textbook. So lots of people write textbooks for higher education, and it's very unusual to have your textbook make it to a second edition. I actually have written a textbook and made it to a second edition, which is a huge thing in higher education. If you can get into the primary and secondary market, you have a cash cow. Almost nobody writes textbooks for those markets because you have to meet the curriculum requirements of both California and Texas, which are two diametrically opposed states. So I had this friend who decided that he was going to write a textbook for American national government for the high school curriculum, which is civics, right? You take civics in high school and they teach you about the three branches of government, yada, 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 right? So he writes this textbook and he talks about these models that are well known in political science circles regarding various types of federalism. So I used to be a political scientist, so I'm pretty familiar with these models. From the founding of our nation until about the Great Depression, what we had in terms of a federal model was what we call the layer cake model of federalism, where you had the states, which were the primary actors, and the national government on top, which was much smaller and limited, because the government of the United States, the federal government, is not a government of general police jurisdiction. And by that, we mean that it is defined in the United States Constitution what it can and cannot do. The states, on the other hand, are jurisdictions of general police powers. And by police powers, we don't mean like the police officer out there with the lights and sirens. We mean the ability to regulate, not just things that are criminal, but things that are dangerous, right? So in terms of business, you are regulated by the state very heavily. I own a restaurant and a bed and breakfast as one of the businesses that I own on the side. I inherited it from my family. That's regulated by the Department of Health, right? I can't just serve, meat that comes from someplace that's not licensed to process the food, right? It's regulated by the health department. I'm regulated by a variety of jurisdictions, right, at the state. So we have this layer cake. So the national government and the state government were largely independent. The national government was very limited. What did it focus on for most of our history? Well, it focused on things like national defense, right? The regulation of interstate commerce as opposed to intrastate commerce. Most commerce was intrastate, and so the federal government didn't regulate a whole lot. Well, beginning with the Great Depression, what we got what's called the marble cake model of federalism, where it becomes almost impossible to tell where the federal government begins and the state government ends, or the state government begins and the federal government ends, because so much of the problems of this nation were placed on the doorstep of the federal government because we couldn't handle it at a state level. It was beyond our ability to control. And so how did the federal government do that? Well, they largely started doing things like through the WPA projects, grants and aid to the states, where they give the states money. Why is it that the drinking age is 21 in the United States? That's not a federal issue. Every state has mandated that the drinking age is 21. The federal government mandated it, and the way they got away with it is by using federal highway funds. If you want federal highway funds, you have to raise the drinking age to 21. In Oklahoma, for years, my law partner, who's now deceased, remembers when he could drink at 18 in Oklahoma. You could buy Low Point beer at 18. Can't do that anymore. Why? Because the federal government says you want federal highway funds, you raise the drinking age to 21. We probably ought to raise it to what? 25. Why? Well, studies in modern psychiatry suggest that your brain is not fully formed until you're 25. You lack impulse control. Right? So because of grants and aid and other things, we get this marble cake model of federalism where it becomes impossible to determine whether or not the state or the federal government is interacting. So we have the Department of Health, which regulates my business. What kinds of regulations to the Department of Health? Well, I can't just buy food that is processed at, Joe's meat processing that's not regulated by the USDA, right? The United States Department of Agriculture plays a role in this. And so it becomes impossible. Now, the reason this is important and the reason I bring this up is he talks about these models in his textbook, and the state of California rejected his textbook, which meant that it was not going to be used by classes in California. Again, you have to have 2 states, right, to get your textbook adopted by textbook publishers. What are those 2 states? California and Texas. Texas had no problem with this discussion of layer cake and marble cake models of federalism. California did because they said that it promoted unhealthy eating habits in children because it discussed cake. And it would make children want cake. And cake is bad. Right? This is an example of how government sort of works. So goals and objectives, right? Like your goal is to graduate college with a 3.0. How do we make that a better goal? Are we going to open up the course catalog and throw darts at it or flip pages and decide, it opened up to musical theater? Well, There's a degree for you. What are you gonna do with that degree? Musical theater. Had a student that was a musical theater major several years ago. Again, I don't know why he was in my class, but what are you gonna do with that? Can you get a job with that degree? I'm not suggesting that, we shouldn't have musical theater majors, but it's gonna be really hard. If you get a degree in professional selling, I can guarantee, I have the only program on this college that has 100% placement of both my majors and minors. Professional sales. 80% of those majors and minors make over 6 figures a year, their first year. Impressive, right? Sales is the only profession that you can choose that allows you to determine what your salary is. The more you sell, the more you make. One of my students who went to work for US Foods said, I wanted to take my family to Disney World and wanted to stay on property. And I decided that in order to do that, I had to sell 1 extra case of meat a week. Not a difficult task in Oklahoma to sell 1 extra case of meat. His territory was Western Oklahoma. Not a lot of vegans out there. Not a difficult task. So how do we make this a better goal? You want to graduate with a degree 3.0. Well, we could make it a better goal by saying, I want to graduate with a degree in marketing or in professional sales. This is my shameless plug for my program. In 4 years with a 3.0, right? Specificity is key here. I'm not just going to open up the degree catalog and flip to whatever page happens to fall open. Oh, sociology. That's what I'll get a degree in. Again, what are you going to do with that degree? Well, you might get a job. What do most sociologists get a degree, or what do they get jobs in? I don't know, social work. Worthy goal, maybe. Not a lot of jobs, right? The state of Oklahoma is cutting those jobs left and right. So a good goal or objective is very specific, right? I want to graduate with a degree in accounting or finance or marketing or management in 4 years, and I want to have a 3.0 or better. Why do you think the 3.0? Why did you pick 3.0 as your goal? I used to tell students, that doesn't matter. Nobody's going to look at your transcript. It's the only thing that matters is get a degree. But in an age of big data, actually one of the companies that sponsors our sales competition, Paycom, actually looks at whether or not you graduated above a 3.5. They've determined that is the level. Those people who have above a 3.5 or are higher achievers. They didn't used to care about that, but they've now decided. So I used to tell students, it doesn't matter. I graduated with a 4.0. I was outstanding undergraduate student in the College of Liberal Arts the year that I graduated. I didn't graduate with a business degree, by the way. I graduated with a degree in political science, a completely worthless degree unless you're going to go to law school, right? It's the #1 most represented degree in law school. Why? Well, because you learn a lot about legal studies and political science. You can take things like constitutional law, administrative law, criminal law and procedure in your undergraduate, which prepares you for what you're going to experience in law school, right? So that's what I did. I got a degree in political science, got a master's degree in political science, went to law school, and then decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. As the university's lawyer. It was a horrible job. My job was throwing students off campus. Not a fun job. So I went and got a PhD in marketing instead. So 3.0, why did you pick 3.0?
Seemed like a reasonable goal, I guess.
Seems like a reasonable goal. It's not a 4.0. You're giving yourself some wiggle room there. You could get a couple of B's, maybe even a C, and still graduate with a 3.0. Okay. All right. Like I said, I used to say that doesn't matter. But now it does. Like, businesses actually do care. With the ability to analyze large data sets on you, Paycom cares. They look at your resume and they look at your grade point average, and if you don't have a 3.5, they won't hire you. And more businesses are now doing this. So you want to graduate with 3.0, you want to graduate with a specific degree in a field that you know will pay dividends. That's the reason you're here. Thomas Jefferson founded the first publicly funded secular institution of higher education in the world. Historically speaking, colleges and universities grew out of the three learned professions, and the oldest of those is theology, the second oldest is law, and then medicine. And they were associated with largely the churches, primarily the Catholic Church in the Western world. And Jefferson founds the University of Virginia, and he wants it to be a place where you come and you listen to the lectures and you leave when you felt educated. Would any of you do that if you weren't going to get a degree? He didn't want it to be a degree granting institution, and yet it is a degree granting institution. Why? Because nobody's going to do this if they don't get something at the end. This piece of paper that, again, if you went back even 15 years ago, I would have said it didn't really matter what you got a degree in, so long as you got a degree. That's no longer true. It used to be that if you got a college degree, your chances of achieving middle-class status were pretty good. That's no longer the case. You have to get a degree in something that has substantive skills. Employers want to know that you can think critically, but that you also have not just the ability to think critically, but the ability to think critically in a substantive area, to develop marketing plans that are relevant to their business, right? So you get this degree, you've got this goal, right? You've got this objective that you want to accomplish, right? So businesses do the same thing. What is their objective? Well, it's generally to make money, right? And that's generally the goal of business. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to set specific goals. I am going to offer a service or product that the consumer wants. Apple does that. We all want this phone. Why? I don't know, because it's got FaceTime. What else does that? I mean, the reason I have one is because I'm a commercial pilot and it allows me to use ForeFlight. You can't get ForeFlight on an Android. It just doesn't work. Can't download it. I don't know why. But all pilots use Apple iOS in some form or fashion. Unless they've changed in the last 30 days, right? Can't get it on a Droid. So we're going to manufacture goods or services that people want. So a good goal is specific and it is objective. One of the things when I was young, I took a lot of philosophy courses. And the reason I took a lot of philosophy courses was because as a younger person, I was very concerned about my own mortality and whether or not there is a God. That was a huge, it was something that weighed upon me. Is there something after this? And so I took all of these philosophy courses, hoping to find the answer. And the answer is there is no good proof for the existence of God. Students often ask me, well, does that mean that you don't believe? No, I do. I have a sincere belief, but I have no faith. Faith implies an unwavering commitment to acceptance in the existence, and I doubt constantly. I have no faith, but I have a belief. So it turns out that one of my goals as a younger person was not really a good goal because it wasn't objective. You can't prove or disprove the existence of God objectively. It's something that I feel deeply, but not something that I can prove. I've gone through all of the philosophical proofs for God. None of them are satisfactory. What are some of the proofs for God? Well, there's the argument from design, right? What do you know about a watch? If you were stranded on a deserted island as a child and brought up by wolves, and you live on this island alone without human interaction, and all of a sudden one day in a bottle, you come upon a watch that's in the bottle. What's the first thing that you know about the watch? Well, you'll look at it, you'll notice that there's, like movement of the hands, that something made it, right? Something made the watch. It didn't just fly together. What's wrong with that argument? That seems like a good argument. It's actually not a very good argument. Well, if you say that, the world is like a watch, it's very complex. So it was obviously made by God. Well, what made God? Right? It's intellectually shallow to say you can't ask that question. So was there a God that made God? It's an infinite regress, right? So turns out that that's not a very good goal because it's not objective. So what's a good goal? Well, it's specific. I mean, a goal like I want to prove or disprove the existence of God is specific, but you're not going to be able to do it objectively, right? So you have to have some specific and objective goal. It has to be measurable. That's the problem with the goal of disproving or proving the existence of God, right? How do you measure this? It's not going to be measurable by any known technique that we have today, right? So we have to have specific, measurable goals. Finally, it should be realistic. This is not to say that you shouldn't have stretch goals. My mother thought I was horribly lazy because I graduated from college in 4 years. She just thought that was horrible. She went to college at 16 and she graduated at 19 because she skipped grades because she was pretty bright. And I took 4 years and she thought that was just like, are you lazy? The vast majority of you will not graduate in 4 years. Why? It's not because you're lazy. My mother thought that. She was just incensed. Why aren't you taking 21 hours? Well, I could do that and I'd be neurotic and crazy and pulling my hair out. I did it. Okay, good for you. The vast majority of you, I didn't have to work. My parents could afford to send me to college. All 4 of my parents, I have 2 biological parents and 2 step parents. All 4 of them have advanced degrees. Not unusual that I would go to college, right? and they paid for it. And not only that, my mother told my brother and I, you could either be a doctor or a lawyer. And by doctor, she meant medical doctor, not PhD. When I said I was going to go to PhD instead of going to law school, she like had this come apart on me and told me that like she brought me into the world and she could take me out. So you're going to go be a lawyer. So my brother and I both went to law school. We both became lawyers. When she would tell people at our bed and breakfast, she would talk about us growing up in this bed and breakfast that's supposedly haunted. And she would talk about her sons, and she would always say, my two sons, the lawyers. Right? And I would be like, I have a PhD. I'm a college professor. And she'd be like, oh yeah, he has a PhD. She wasn't very proud of that. She was really proud of the fact that we were both lawyers. And so we had this, goals in life. And it's not that you shouldn't have stretch goals. So maybe your goal should be that you're going to graduate in 4 years, which would be a stretch for most of you. Why? It's not because you're lazy. It's because most of you have to work. College is really expensive anymore. When I went to college, the state of Oklahoma paid 80% of the bill for my college education. And we paid about 20%. That was just if you paid the full freight. You paid 20%. What is it now? It's exactly the opposite. You're paying 80% of the cost, and the state is paying about 20% of the cost to educate you. What does that mean for most people? It now means that unlike when I went to college, my parents could just write the check because I went to a state school that was relatively cheap. It now means that you have to take out loans or rely on financial aid or work. Most of you work. Almost all of my students have a job, which is why, in spite of the fact that students tell us that they would rather go to class and have face-to-face classes, we offer a face-to-face section and an online section, and which one fills up faster? My online sections, this class is not full. My online sections, full. Why? Because you have to work, right? And that reality makes it difficult. If you are trying to balance work, I didn't have to work. My job was going to school, which is why my mother couldn't understand why I didn't have 21 hours. You don't have anything else to do. That makes it really difficult, doesn't it? So you should have realistic goals. What is a realistic goal? Well, a stretch goal may be I'm going to graduate in 4 years. My mother graduated in 3. Can anybody really conceivably do that if they have to work today? I guess you could, but it would be really, really hard. It would mean that you would have to have an opportunity cost, which would probably be no social life whatsoever. Right? That would be the opportunity cost. Like you're just not going to have, you're going to go to work and go to school and that's it. So they should be realistic. Organizations. Goals are dependent upon the type of organization that we are talking about. So your goals are different than a business, right? Your goal is to probably, for most of you, have a job that allows you to have something like that. This is completely antithetical to my mother's generation. A work-life balance. That's one of the things that we talk about now. And when we talk about internal marketing to our internal consumers, which is important when we think about organizations that encourage living the brand, and we'll talk more about this idea of living the brand, that becomes a big factor. Your generation, my generation, I'm a Gen Xer. Your generation, some of you are younger than millennials. your Generation Z, doesn't necessarily live to work. My mother's generation, they lived to work. That was how they identified, was by what they did. Which is one of the reasons that my mother was so like proud of the fact that both of her sons were lawyers, because that was your identity. And even to this day, it's an important part, right? When you meet somebody new, what's one of the first things that you ask them? You ask them, what do you do for a living? Why? Because that is a big portion of our identity, is what you do for a living. There's some prestige to saying I'm a lawyer, I guess. I don't know. Right? And so goals are dependent upon the types of organizations. In terms of beyond the individual, what kinds of organizations do we have? Well, we have for-profit organizations. This is what most of you will go to work for, is some type of for-profit organization. Now, the formation of that organization can come in different ways. You can have a sole proprietorship, which is a DBA, a doing business as, right? There are lots of these organizations. People start them, they come up with an idea. I had a student when I first started teaching here. He was one of my first students that I wrote a letter of recommendation for, and he graduated and he came to see me and he said, Dr. Aguirre, I got my first job offer. And he was a marketing student. And I said, that's great, Justin. What's your job offer? And he said it was $30,000 a year. And I said, I've been doing this for a long time. So that was really good money, right? $30,000 a year was really good money at the time. And I said, that's really good. And he said, yeah, the problem is that when I was in high school, I started a lawn mowing business and I now have multiple crews that work for me. And I made $150,000 last year mowing yards. And I said, well, Justin, I think if your marketing degree here at UCO taught you anything, it's that you should keep mowing yards rather than take a job at, $30,000 a year. A huge pay cut. He's like, that's kind of what I thought. Like, yep, keep your yard business. Right? So for profit, they are going to want to make money to stay in business. You also have nonprofits that use marketing, right? What are nonprofits? The Red Cross. Right now, we're experiencing a huge natural disaster in California with these horrible fires that have broken out that are consuming millions and, well, not billions of dollars worth of property, right? Who goes into those kinds of locations and provides services and things for people in need? Well, the Red Cross is an example of one of those organizations that does that, right? They go into places where there are natural disasters and they help people, and they're not for profit, right? How do they provide these services? Well, people donate to the Red Cross. You probably see ads on television. You probably get ads on your, iPhone, your Android for things like the Red Cross. And they provide services to these people in need, and they fund it through donations. How do they get those donations? Well, they advertise, right? And people give to them because they support the mission of that organization. You also have governmental entities that use marketing. You see signs, billboards. There's one on Broadway that I can think of that says, the few, the proud, the strong, the Marines, right? So they're recruiting for the armed services. Governments recruit for various positions, things that they want you to engage in. The Affordable Care Act had a huge marketing campaign associated with it to get people to sign up for healthcare if they didn't have it. If they didn't get it through their employers, you could go on the exchange and sign up for healthcare, right? So governments use marketing. Types of for-profits, I talked about DBAs. This is the simplest form. I start a business. My friend or my student who came to me and said, well, I made $100 and something odd thousand last year mowing yards. How did he start? Well, his dad bought him a lawnmower, a truck, and a trailer and said, you're going to have to pay me back. But he bought it for him. And he started by going across the street to his neighbors and saying, I'll mow your yard and I'll do it cheaper than your current yard service, right? And as he built a clientele, word of mouth spread and more people, and then he could afford to go out and buy business cards, and he would take them around and talk to people and say, who's your yard service? Are you happy with them? If you're not, let me bid your yard and see if I can do it cheaper and better. And he built a huge business here in Edmond, mowing yards, right? That's a DBA. You can have a partnership where you have more than one person that puts into the business and participates in it. Or you can have a corporation. Corporations are, generally speaking, one of the most prevalent form, because in some type of corporation, an LLC, a limited partnership, things like that, they provide a limit on your liability. The corporate form allows you to limit liability because the corporation has an identity of its own. It is a distinct organization. Mitt Romney, when he was running for president, got sort of, people laughed at him and sort of gigged him because they were saying, well, corporations are doing all these bad things, right? And he's like, corporations are people, my friends. And everybody laughed. That's true. Corporations are legal people. They have a legal identity. They can own property in their own right. They can sue and be sued. They are legal persons, right? And the reason you do this is it allows you to pool capital, right? So they're a very beneficial form of organization. But you can have lots of attorneys are just DBAs. They just hang a shingle out and it's the law office of so-and-so, right? Lots of small businesses they're intimidated by the corporate form or whatever. And so, they're just doing business as, or their partnerships. All right, so strategy. With regard to strategy, you can have long-term and short-term, and you all should do this for yourself. Again, one of the things I try to do is make this class relevant to you. So what is your strategy for going out and getting a job? Why is it that you're sitting here on a Wednesday morning at 10:43 allowing me to lecture to you when you would rather be, as entertaining as I am, you would probably rather be back home in bed under the covers where it's warm, right? Or hanging out with your friends at Starbucks, tool of the devil. The devil has many tools. Starbucks is one of them. I hate Starbucks. When I travel with students on sales competitions, when I take teams to competition, I tell them there are two things that you cannot say to me, or I will become enormously, upset. One is, I need Starbucks. I hate Starbucks. Tool of the devil. The other is Chick-fil-A. Can't stand Chick-fil-A. Both tools of the devil. Again, the devil has many tools. Those are two of them. And if you want to know why, I'll be happy to give you a whole litany of sins against humanity that Starbucks has created. So long-term and short-term goals, right? What's your short-term goal? Well, it's probably to get through this class without pulling your hair out and to make a decent grade. What's a better goal? Oh, I want to make an A in Principles of Marketing in the spring semester of 2025. Right? That's a short-term goal. Long-term goal is I want to graduate from the University of Central Oklahoma with a degree in accounting, finance, marketing, management, art history. Don't we have an art history, right? You're an art historian. Why are you in this class?
Because I'm doing business.
Minor? Okay, all right. That's probably a good thing.
Well, pieces are expensive and like marketing, I mean, you have to let people know that there's pieces out there.
Right,
Otherwise, I'm not getting any business, so.
okay. So, I want to graduate with a degree in art history. I want to get a job. What do you want to do with your degree in art history?
I want to work in the back of museums.
Okay,
Documenting and touching art pieces that y'all just look at.
okay, all right. So that's your long-term goal, right? Short-term goal is to get through this class, out pulling your hair out, make an A, right? And then graduate, right? So long-term versus short-term. So structural dimensions, and I guess I'm out of time, so I will stop there. We got one person who got a duck today. Stop the recording.